This is Voices from the Field with Katie Lively and Jesse Warren. And today we have Tiffany Hall with us. She played softball from ages 5 to 18, and she began coaching at the recreational level 11 years ago and then started travel a year later. She was a board member, vice president, and then president of the JTAA Seahawks organization in Jupiter, Florida. She also took on a managerial role with the Rock Gold organization under Coach Glenn Conrad in 2022. And then on top of all of that, she's also a mom of two softball players, Lainey and Eva. Lainey just committed to play at UAB, which is super exciting. And her other daughter, Eva, is a 2029. So about to start that process all over again here in a couple of years. But we're so excited to have Tiffany on just to get her insight on recruiting, on recreational leagues and their importance in the game, and then just being a parent to competitive softball players. So thank you, Tiffany, for being with us today. And like kind of I mentioned in your introduction, you've been deeply involved in the softball community really since you were 5 years old, which is awesome, and then into the community in South Florida. And we just want to know, like, how has your experience shaped your perspective on the role of recreational leagues and growing the sport? Because I feel like recreational leagues are kind of going away, and people are more, gravitating toward travel ball. So I kind of want to hear your experience on, the role that you think that rec leagues have in the game of softball.
Yeah, so the rec league that I grew up playing in is the rec league that I ended up also running later.
That's cool.
So that was like my way to kind of, pay it back, because it was such a big part of my growing up. It gave me something to do. It gave me a way to make friends, help kind of keep me focused and active instead of maybe sitting around doing other things. And I felt that was a very important part of my upbringing. And so I wanted to introduce that to my kids as well. And also I'm a teacher, so I'm already involved in the community and the overall growth of kids. I think a lot of times we just think about making them the best athlete, but we also want to make them the best human. And so it's not always, our sport is for everybody. It's not just for only the ones that can make it to the highest levels. And so I think, that was my draw to it, is like, share it with everybody. I remember seeing a 3-year-old and be like, do you have a softball at home? And she'd be like, no. And I'm like, here, have a softball, so just kind of really spreading it, getting more people involved with it. The more kids that are interested in it, the more, they're going to watch it on TV. And so it just really helps grow the sport.
Yeah.
Really organically from a young age.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a good introduction to the game instead of jumping right into travel ball, traveling all over the country, they kind of like a less intense introduction to where kids can really fall in love with the sport. I feel like that's so important, especially now with so many different club organizations around the country.
Yeah. And then I know you mentioned obviously working in the communities, you being a teacher, obviously having two girls that are playing softball, and being a parent to them. What advice do you have for parents and communities looking to strike a balance between, nurturing a love for the game, but also creating that competitive balance and those competitive skills for, travel ball, then moving on to college and hopefully one day playing, at the highest level, which is the pros?
Yeah. For like developing the competitive spirit, I get to start with the kids when they're young. We actually started a preschool league. We had 3 and 4-year-olds out there. They're not playing softball the way you want to play, they're not understanding hitting and running to first base. Even most of the time they ran to the pitcher's mound. So you teach them the competitive side through other games that involve developing their skills. Put a bucket on a tee and see who can hit the bucket, or, what was it? Solo cups in the fence, knock the solo cup out. So you're still helping them practice the skills, but competing to win something outside of the game. They're not really understanding getting 4 runs versus getting 2 runs means we win yet, and even by, 6, they're still not all the way there. They don't throw great. When they warm up, there's more running back and picking up the ball than playing catch yet. So I'm just given the opportunities to actually develop those skills in a competitive environment outside of maybe winning or losing the game yet. That's kind of my advice on dealing with that really young group. And then as they get older and they start understanding, now they're getting into kid pitch and they, do understand the win and loss factor, and just trying to keep it, fun and competitive. If you're a league director and there's one team, if you let your teams kind of just form based off of their friends, or, a group of coaches just get together and kind of try to get these winning teams together in a recreational league, it's going to make it not very exciting for half the league. And then, not very exciting for the other leagues, half the league either, because they're just beating everybody all the time. So to try to keep them competitive and balanced is probably a good idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like with that competitiveness, like you want to be able to grow that competitiveness as they go on. But then, like you said, kind of make sure they're still having fun and being with their friends. 'Cause I think that gets lost a lot. I know me and Jesse, every time we have interviews with travel softball coaches, like we always talk about, they kind of forget that love and like why they play because it gets so competitive and it's so intense, especially from a young age. So I think that's super, super important. And then obviously you being a board member, vice president, and president of a recreational league, you're a strong proponent for it. And I love that. I think we need more of that in our game, especially now. And so I kind of want to ask you, for families out there, for parents out there that are probably watching this interview, how would you tell them to navigate the progression from starting in a rec league and then maybe start going into a local travel ball team and then regional, and then eventually, if they want to play at a national level, playing at that national level? Because not only do you have experience as a recreational league president, but also as a parent who has a kid that just committed to play Division I softball. So kind of give us what you would kind of say to that progression to be able to make sure that they get the skills and tools they need.
Yeah, so when I look back, just on my older daughter's progression, I think like the main role that rec played for her was giving her that opportunity to like grow some leadership skills, maybe play in a more relaxed environment where she could try a few things out. Like actually, she wouldn't even be a lefty slapper if it wasn't for rec, because she started out as a righty and she wasn't getting on base. She was like, "Mom, I think I want to be a lefty," and I was like, "That's ridiculous. You're a righty." And so, it was like the last game of our rec season. And I was like, whatever, just go up there and hit lefty if you want. And she cranked it out center field. And I was like, oh, maybe you'll be a lefty. I don't know. And now she's a lefty. So like, it gives them that chance to just like experiment and like say things aren't working. And so what if she didn't hit the ball in that game? It's not, I didn't pay $5,000 to go out to California. It's right down the street and you're playing with your friends and it worked. So I think it does provide opportunities that maybe parents aren't realizing that it does, and it's for them to experience or discover themselves in the game a little bit more versus the pressure of playing at a high level all the time.
How would you progress that as like an 8-year-old, starting out to going into a travel ball? Like when do you decide, to go to travel ball?
I get it. When they're young, the games can be a little boring. And if your kid's competitive, you want to, branch out and kind of get them playing against, peer competition, which is great. It really is. A lot of parents want to separate from rec at that point because they think it's too time consuming. I mean, most rec leagues are going to run about 9 weeks. It's not, that much, in my opinion. And then you can just roll right into, the more competitive exposure, depending on where you're at. I'm also learning it's different everywhere. When I was in South Florida, that market is a little different than where I'm at now.
Yes.
When we moved up here, I put my son, he's not 10, but at the time he was 9, I put him in a rec league and I was like, yeah, I don't know if we're going to do this.
Right.
Because it was just, our population is 2,000 people. So there's like 12 kids. So I get it's different everywhere. If you're in a smaller market and there's just not a lot of opportunities, then you have to go where you have to go. But yeah, for 8U, let them play rec, let them explore the game, let them try a bunch of different positions. And then if they're good and they want to, and it's on, you'll know it. Like, don't push them at 8, but if they are like, I want to play some more and I want to learn more, then 4 or 5 tournaments, 6 tournaments, maybe in the summer, depending on the schedules and stuff like that, get them into that. I personally like to throw in one little experience trip, you don't have to travel at that age, but I think when you think of the word travel ball, you're like, well, I shouldn't stay in a hotel. So, maybe throw one of those in. And in some ways, it's kind of for you to help start learning how this all works too, especially if you have more kids, how are you going to handle this in 2 years or 4 years as it gets a little bit crazier? Yeah. So that's a nice little progression there. Then you get into like 10U, and 10U is, in Florida at least, is when we start kid pitch. That first year can be rough. But again, the rec league is a great opportunity to grow and develop a lot of arms. I think Jupiter actually does a really, really good job. Like the town in general has always developed pitchers. We have a great pitching instructor in the area that would, comes to the fields and trains the kids and does clinics with the organization. And I mean, if you got arms, your high school is going to be great in a couple, years. Like, so, and that happens at the rec level, really. If they don't like it, that, they fall off. And if they do, they develop more from there. And then again, after the rec season's over, go and play some more tournaments in the summer. 12U that's when it gets a little bit more tricky, at least where we were. You start introducing middle school ball. Not everybody has middle school ball, but so now there's some more things kind of competing for that time. If they're getting real serious about it now, there's a little bit more lessons. Maybe they're still playing a rec sport, another rec sport, which is great. So by 12U, it does get hard to like maintain it at that rec level, but it can be done. And it's just kind of, where the league stands with their numbers and what they can put together. Maybe have to coordinate with some other neighboring leagues to get some more games and stuff like that. But that fall off around 12U is pretty significant. Kids that aren't interested anymore fall off, and the kids that really want to do something with it, they're trying to go off and play a little bit more competitive. So
yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned that, like, it almost gives an opportunity to fail and it not be as high stakes. I think that's huge, because some players starting out, like, they start out afraid of failure because they're in such, a competitive situation, instead of letting these 8-year-olds, like even 6-year-old, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, they don't have to worry about failing, because it's a little bit less like high stakes. So I love that you mentioned that. I think that's super important.
And it also gives them a chance to feel themselves out, right? Like,
yes,
a lot of these kids are overtrained really young. And I think it was one of the coaches from Boston or University of Boston or Boston College, I can't remember, but he was saying, it would be nice to see kids like be able to like figure it out again, like instead of as soon as they, their swing gets jacked a little bit or they're not throwing right, like going straight to the trainer to fix it. Like, feel it.
I think that's the difference.
The opportunities to do that when you're young.
Yeah.
I think that's the differences in like the generation now. It's like Katie and I's, when we were younger, it's like figure it out yourself. And now it's always like they're looking for everyone to give them the answers.
Yeah.
That the growth is just like not the same as far as like the skill set. But I know you mentioned like that, like as your kids are getting older, you want them to experience a little bit more when it comes to like traveling. And I know like an 8U team from Florida that just took a trip to Alabama for a national tournament. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, they're 8 years old. Like, I get the travel experience, but it's like you're wasting so much money on these tournaments, and the kids aren't being recruited at this age for a national tournament of play. So my question to you would be just like, do you have any advice for parents who feel the pressure to fly across the country for games and showcases at such a high level, especially like at a young age, and how can they navigate that if they are on a team that is wanting to do those high tournaments across, the country, and their kid is still 8 and 10 years old?
Yeah. I mean, the way I explain it is if you can do it, it's fun. It's great if that's how you want to spend your weekends, and it's still fun. It's not a ton of pressure. And it's not, being a hardship on your finances or your family and your experience, then by all means go for it. It's fun. I've done the national level at an older age and thoroughly enjoy it. But what is the value when you're 8 or 10? That's going to be different for everybody. I'm thankful that other teams did it, because then when we played them, we kind of knew where we stood without having to go to Colorado or wherever else, they're flying off to these days. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad some people do it. I think, it's part of the engine, that keeps this whole thing running. But it's a lot. So if you're on a team that wants to do those things, I mean, hopefully at 8U and 10U, that's something you knew going in. You're signing up to be on a team that's going to do all this stuff. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes, especially at 10U. I think 8U, maybe not yet, but at 10U, if they're having a lot of success, through that 8U time period, and they want to go see how they stand on that national stage, If it's something where all the families can do it, that's good. But if not, a good way for you to know if your kid is at that level or if your team is at that level is just to seek out tournaments where people and teams are going off and doing those things, but also playing in your region. So that's what we did. We would always, kind of, we were in South Florida, so a lot of times we would look in the Orlando area, and a couple of those teams would like to go off to like Tennessee or Texas or something like that, and we would kind of watch and see how they fared there, and then kind of gauge where we were at based on how we played against them. So that's one way to kind of see where you're at without having to do the national level travel just yet.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think too, like, I love that you mentioned, like, if you can do it, do it. There's no pressure either way, but I definitely think that some parents definitely feel that pressure. I'm sure that's something that happens a lot, especially at that younger age. So kind of going into playing on that national level and the recruitment piece of it, and kind of what you have to do and sacrifice to get your player noticed. You have one daughter that just committed to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which is a Division I, and that's super exciting. It's a lot of hard work. I know that the 2026 class has felt the pressure of getting recruited. And so can you share some lessons or like hindsight insights that you've had as a parent walking your player through the recruiting process, and kind of just share it with families that may be preparing to do the same in the next few years?
So the number one key takeaway I got from the whole experience is relationships matter. Like from the time you're 5, the relationships you're building with your teammates and your coaches at that level to, even your competitors. Like there's so many kids that, Lainey grew up playing against that we still talk to. Like we never played with them. We played against them, but we cared about each other's journeys, and, you have that to bounce off of. And then, starting relationships with the coaches at the programs that you are targeting and want to get to. If they don't know who you are, if you don't know who they are, it's really hard to, be comfortable in your decision, to go to a school, far away and from your family if you haven't developed some solid relationships. And also relationships that your travel ball coaches have, those are pretty important in your recruiting process as well. So in general, across the board, the softball community is small. Like, I mean, it's a nationwide thing, but it's small. And the more you're in it, the more you realize, there's a lot of good people, and the more of them the better off you're going to be.
100%. That's probably the best advice I've heard too, is it's all about those relationships, because it's so true. It is so true.
And then on the hindsight, I think I mentioned earlier, so the way my kids' birthdays fall is a little different too. Like Lainey's an older for her class, so she had a different timeline than Eva, who's younger for her class. And it's changing now because the birth year cutoffs are changing. But with, when I started kind of planning the progression for Lainey, I was like, well, that summer before your junior year is a big summer. So let's make sure, that's when you kind of get out there and see where you're at. That's when we started that more national level with her. She was on a regional level before that. But, with Eva now, like kind of on that hindsight, I'm like, we're going to start a year earlier, because she did get some recognition that summer before her junior year, but there was just no time to really develop anything from that. Yeah. So now hindsight, I would start a year earlier.
Okay.
So like your sophomore, like the summer of your sophomore year, if you're wanting to get that national level exposure, I think that would probably be my biggest takeaway, was probably that one's better.
Yeah, that's big. Yeah, no, that makes sense too. So I think that definitely could be helpful for a lot of parents that don't really know how to start this process. So that's some good advice. What are the most significant changes you've observed in softball since your time as a player? Because I know you've been playing for a long time. You played, like you said, from 5 to 18 years old. So that's a long time. And I know that softball's always changing and it's evolving. I know it's changed so much since I've played. I know it's changed a lot since Jessie has played travel ball. Obviously, she's still playing now. But how have those changes impact how families approach the sport? And what changes have you seen that you're like, this was so much different than it was when I was playing ball?
Well, when I started, I played slow pitch, so that's the biggest change. So 1996, I think, is when UF got their fast pitch program. So I was 16, and that was, the Olympics. So that was kind of like when softball, in my world, softball was more than just, a sport you played to stay busy. And then we got more recognition, in the communities that I was in. But besides that, looking more at just like the progression since I've been on the, adult side of it, it's definitely the sport's grown, and that I'm so thankful for. Especially, people like Jessie. We've watched her from the time she was playing at FSU, winning that national championship, to watching her play for the Pride, and just kind of like she coached Eva when she was like 10 or something at, doing like the All-American games. So, just I hope how much people like you have really helped this sport grow just by creating all that energy and just giving kids something to look forward to that I didn't have. So that part's awesome, and thank you. But on the actual, the way the sport's played at the youth level now, it's gone. It used to be protected. Like rec leagues were a little bit protected by the tournament directors. They share umpires and stuff like that. So in the spring, we used to just have like a few one-day tournaments at the travel level, still allowed them to play Saturday rec games and stuff like that. And then, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of started switching. So rec wasn't protected as much in our area, at least. And there was a lot more 2-day tournaments. And, travel ball used to be in the summer, maybe start May, we can go through July or whatever. And now travel ball is starting with, there's 10U tournaments right now.
Yeah.
Like,
It's crazy.
January, they're freezing, but they're out there and they're playing. So it has come, full year round now at the competitive level, which is helping with the growth. But I also think we're seeing some of that effects of not having that rec program support too, because now there's no kids to pull from, like there's not this pool of talent that's being developed in these little communities where you can kind of bring them together and create some solid travel ball teams. So I think, that's the biggest change, is just that, travel's kind of gotten too long, too much maybe. And it's having an impact on growing some of that organic talent in the communities.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that, because that's what we see a lot of with the rest. We just had a podcast episode about rest and recovery and how it's not there anymore as much as it used to be, because it's just year round all the time. They play literally, like you said, from January, and they may have like a few weeks off, randomly, but they don't truly have, a solid rest, period, which is so important, not only for their sport, but just like for their growth. Like, just as a child that's, growing and developing, they need that rest, mentally and physically. So, I definitely agree with that. Jessie, do you want to finish it off?
Yeah, we'll have one more question for you, and then we can let you go. We really appreciate you, like we said earlier, coming on and spending some time with us. But for our last question, what would you say to families who are hesitant to start in rec leagues or feel they need to jump straight into high-level travel ball to ensure that their child's like successful and ensure that their child's seen and recruited the correct way, I guess?
I think I touched on it earlier, right? Like those rec leagues kind of provide opportunities for them to kind of discover who they are in the sport and, kind of feel out, different ways of doing things without that pressure of failure. But I do also realize that, every community has a different experience. I'm drawing on mine where that pool of talent was, which is very different than where I'm at now. So, but when it comes down to it, being part of rec program is also being part of your community. You have a strong core of community at that local level. That's just going to help you as a family and your child as an athlete to kind of feel like they're really rooted in that community outside, and grow their community. Like now I feel like we have like a regional community versus just, our small community that we started in. It allows those kids to play for fun. There's a lot of opportunities to develop leadership skills, especially if, as they get to that 12U level and they start giving back to their local rec leagues and helping with the 8-year-olds and the 10-year-olds and stuff like that. mastery, if you can teach it as a sign of mastery. So I think you get a lot out of that. I don't think that you need to be worried your kid's going to fall behind if they're playing, rec a little bit and not, constantly year-round travel ball competitive. And in some cases, you may be getting the opposite effect, right? I follow a lot of teams from 8U, 10U up until now, and watching these kids commit, and I don't really feel like it's happening at any higher rate if they played, crazy high level young. And a lot of them don't even play anymore. So keep that in mind. So the rec experience actually could benefit them and help them stay in the sport a little bit longer, because it might actually help them feel a little bit more connected at that community level.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. I think I can't remember directly what you said, but I love that you said like participating in the rec is participating in your community. I love that. That's such a good way to think about it, and a good representation of what the rec league it really is, and how it can really help your player develop and grow, and then also just kind of build that community aspect. So that's awesome. I love that. That's like might be the header of the interview, because that's awesome. But I just want to thank you again, Tiffany, for hopping on an interview with us. I loved our conversation. I love the insights you bring with rec leagues, and being a mom that has children that are committed, you're successful in that progression that you had with them. So it's definitely credible, and it's something that we love to talk about, and we need to talk more about, because I think it's not talked about enough with that rec league. So thank you again, Tiffany, for hopping on. We wish your daughters the best of luck in their school ball and travel ball seasons, and we'll be in touch. And if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know.
Awesome. Thank you. Go Blazers.
Awesome. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.